It is the 31st millennium. Horus may have failed to replace his father on the imperial throne, but the Imperium of Man, which he plunged into civil war, now lies in ruins. The Emperor himself lies mortally wounded on the Golden Throne, never to rise again. From the relative safety of the Eye of Terror, the traitor legions bide their time until they can return to the galaxy. Amongst them is the former first captain of the Sons of Horus, Ezekiel Abaddon. Abaddon has sworn to succeed where his father has failed, and to rally the disparate forces of chaos under one banner. To do so, he must first prove his worth by laying claim to the demon sword Dracnian. Thus began the First Black Crusade and the long war of the Chaos Astartes against the realm of the Emperor. And since Abaddon's plan is going to take a few thousand years, best pass the time honing your tactical skills with our sponsor, Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus. This is an official Warhammer 40,000 mobile strategy game featuring fast-paced tactical battles and powerful champions of the Warhammer 40,000 world. Collect fighters from 17 factions, always unlocking new tactical options as you strive for victory in both PvE campaigns, PvP competitive events, or in collaborative guild raids against powerful bosses. The battles are quick and deadly, perfect for some Warhammer action on the go, and the longer you play, the more content you'll get, with new updates being developed all the time and special community events to take part in. Most importantly of all, the launch of even more units and faction options from the endless wars of the Warhammer 40,000 world, such as the recent addition of the infamous Blood Angels Space Marines. Get in now and prepare for Halloween, when the Gene Stealer cults are going to cause the community some trouble. So enjoy these battles and join the Tacticus community by downloading the game for free on Android or iOS via our link in the description. After receiving Moriana's counsel, Abaddon's path was clear. The former first captain needed to rally his forces, exit the Eye of Terror, smash Sigismund's blockading fleet, and punch through Imperial space. Yet the true aim of what Imperial scholars would dub the First Black Crusade was not wanton destruction. Ezekiel Abaddon meant to claim the Demon Blade Dracnian before his rival Darovec could beat him to the punch. In so doing, he would prove his worth to mortals and Neverborn alike, and become Warmaster to all Chaos forces in the galaxy, giving him the strength to lay waste to the Imperium of Man. Yet before he could put any of those grand plans into action, Abaddon first needed to exit the Eye of Terror. This, however, was far easier said than done. The Eye of Terror was the largest warp anomaly in the galaxy, spanning several thousand light-years. It was ravaged by terrible warp storms, and travelling either in or out was incredibly perilous. Even fully trained navigators would find it almost impossible to make sense of the sea of unreality within the Eye. Only the blessing of the Chaos Gods could truly guarantee safe passage in this Emperor-forsaken corner of the cosmos. The gods, however, were fickle creatures. Their blessing did not come easily, and could be lost in the blink of an eye. Abaddon still had to prove himself to the ruinous powers before he could even begin to depend upon their favour. Like an explorer from the tales of old terror, Abaddon was lost in a vast sea he simply could not cross. Abaddon's fleet wandered through the Eye for months, trying to find a way out. To make matters worse, it soon became apparent that Darovec was following the Black Legion. He too was trying to get out of the Eye, and figured the best course of action was to follow his rival. The Sorcerer Lord made use of his powerful fleet to lay waste to Abaddon's worlds. The first captain had removed most of their garrison to prepare for his crusade, making them easy targets for his enemies. One by one, they fell under the heavy bombardment of the Legion host. Soon enough, Darovec began nipping at Abaddon's heels, and costly skirmishes erupted between both forces. While the Legion host held a numerical advantage, neither side could risk an open battle, for their mutual destruction was all but assured if they did. Should they slaughter one another in the Eye, Sigismund's fleet would be an insurmountable obstacle, and the demon sword would forever elude its seekers. Thus a strained truce was called. Both forces agreed to meet face to face on the dead Eldar craft world of Tel Shara to discuss their future actions. The two Chaos Lords were after the same prize, and both were stuck in the same warp storms. It was clear for all to see that the ruinous powers were testing their champions. Abaddon first set foot on Tel Shara, accompanied by his faithful Ezekarian, who included the sorcerer Iskander Kion and the swordmaster Telemachon Lyris. Moments later, Darovec joined them. He was an imposing figure, even taller than Abaddon. The ruinous powers had blessed him with a grotesque bulk and a slew of other physical mutations. The warp seemed to murmur around Darovec. Disease and sibilant whispers hung around him like a veil. Never-born voices echoed where the Chaos Lord stood, promising riches and everlasting life to whoever was foolish enough to heed them. A massive pair of wings jutted from the back of his Terminator armor, though they were far too weak to lift him up. Darovec taunted the Black Legion, describing the fate of their brothers. He spoke of the many worlds he put to the torch and the garrisons he slew in torment. Some of Abaddon's lieutenants had been mutilated before being lowered into industrial acid. Others were slowly crushed beneath tank treads to the jeers of their enemies. One Black Legion commander was even peeled from his armor with lasers. The Legion host had then quartered him and fed him to demon hounds while he was still alive. His gnawed bones had then been gathered by Darovec's men and wrapped within the folds of a Black Legion banner. The banner was passed around the throngs of mutants and beastmen of the Legion host for them to urinate on. This trophy was now presented to Abaddon in a show of contempt and malice. Darovec made his demands. In exchange for a truce, he wanted ships and worlds from the Black Legion. Abaddon refused him at every turn. It was at this moment that fate intervened. From the shadows of Tel Shara emerged a solitary warrior, clad in an unknown mark of Astartes' power armor. As the figure approached, warning cries echoed from both fleets. Mysterious vessels were appearing out of the warp. Warriors identical to the one on Tel Shara appeared on the decks of every ship in orbit. The warrior stood in front of Abaddon and Darovec. Iskander Khayan would recall that the man was undoubtedly dead to his sixth sense, though he seemed alive to all others. The warrior called himself Saranos. His warband, however, was known by many names: Infernum Doctoriae, Umbra Larua, or simply the Warp Ghosts in Low Gothic. They claimed to be the ferrymen of the Immaterium, and promised to guide one of the two rival warbands safely through to real space if they could meet their fee. Any other warband seeking such a boast would have been met with derision. Yet one did not need to be a sorcerer to see that the ghosts were no mere Astartes. They were a spectral warband of lost souls, wreathed in an eerie green glow and existing somewhere between life and death. In many ways, they were a dark parallel to the dreaded Legion of the Damned. Yet, as far as Ezekiel Abaddon was concerned, these matters were of no true importance. Whatever they might be, the warp ghosts were ultimately but a means to an end. If anyone could ferry his forces out of the Eye, it was they. Darovec was the first to make his offer. In exchange for safe passage, the Chaos Sorcerer would offer the ghosts 20 ships of war and 3 million slaves, all torn from the Black Legion. In addition, Darovec promised access to his demon forges and manufacturiae. Finally, he promised his favour and assistance in the future when he finally laid claim to Draknien. This was a mighty offer. Even a single of those 3 boons had inestimable value for any Chaos warband. Saranos, however, simply acknowledged the proposition and turned to Abaddon. Ezekiel thought long about what to offer his would-be guide. He proclaimed that the greatest goals required the greatest sacrifices. To the dismay of his followers, Abaddon told the warrior to take whatever he needed from the Black Legion. At that moment, dozens of warp ghosts appeared next to Saranos. Training their bolters on Darovec, they ordered the Legion host to go back to their ships. Their offer had been rejected. The ghosts would lead the Black Legion through the Eye and onto their destiny. The toll, however, was to be steep. In exchange for safe passage, the warp ghosts demanded Abaddon hand over all the psychically gifted children among the slaves and dregs of his fleet. In addition, they laid claim to all the sorcerer warp guides of the Black Legion. Slaves were certainly beneath Abaddon's concern, but no Chaos force could easily afford to lose their sorcerers. Besides their destructive capability in battle, their dark arts were essential for any warlord in the service of the ruinous powers. Yet for all his martial might, Abaddon had little choice. After all, not one of his warp guides had managed to find a way out of the Eye. Sacrifices had to be made. The order was given. One by one, the Black Legion warp guides were handed over to the warp ghosts, never to be seen again. From the bowels of the ships, screams and supplications told the Chaos Astartes the reaping had begun. Thousands of children were ripped from their mothers' arms by the warp ghosts. Whatever resistance the malnourished slaves put up, it was useless in the face of the undead, power-armored giants that had come for their young. Millions of lost souls called the lower levels of the Chaos ships home. Most of these mortals had been born in the horrors of the warp. As such, the ghosts found fertile ground for the harvesting of psychic recruits. These wretched creatures would serve them well. One day they would join their ranks and carry on the ghost's duties in undeath. Not even Abaddon's own warp guide and Iskander's tutor were spared. Known as Ashokai, the old Astartes went voluntarily with his captors. As he saw it, his was a willing sacrifice in the name of brotherhood. So it was that the first Black Crusade set off. Guided by the spectral heretic Astartes, Abaddon's forces navigated the storms of the Eye of Terror. Unbeknownst to them, however, Darovek doggedly followed them through the Immaterium. The Chaos Sorcerer made use of all his warped knowledge to trail the immaterial wake of the Black Legion. He was determined not to let his rival get the better of him, no matter the threat to his fleet. Saranos sat impassively at Ashokai's old place. Taking control of the vengeful spirit, the ghost guided Abaddon's fleet without incident. His unnatural control of the ebbs and flow of the warp soon delivered Abaddon's forces from the clutches of the Eye. For the first time in centuries, the Chaos Legionnaires emerged from the Cadian Gate into real space. Not a single vessel had been lost in transit, truly a remarkable feat for any warp jump. Yet despite this achievement and their newly found freedom, not one Astartes cheered. Even for their transhuman minds, the events of the past few days had been overwhelming. Saranos declared their agreement fulfilled. Before he departed, however, Iskander demanded the ghost remove his helmet. Impassively, the warrior complied. To the shock of all those gathered on the bridge of the vengeful spirit, Saranos was revealed to be none other than Ashokai. Time is irrelevant in the warp, and so the former Black Legionnaire declared that he had always been at the Legion's service and would be many times again in the future. With that, the warp ghosts departed as swiftly as they had arrived. The Black Legion did not have long to enjoy the quiet of real space. Augur scans began detecting the presence of a large fleet heading their way at attack speed. Sigismund had come. After centuries of waiting, the High Marshal's patience had finally been rewarded. From the vast distance of the void, Abaddon could make out the Imperial ships. Clad in black, much like his own, they were led by a massive Gloriana-class battleship. Called the Eternal Crusader, Sigismund's flagship was more than a match for the vengeful spirit. The Chaos Fleet was larger, but the constant internecine warfare within the Eye had taken its toll on it. Yet before they exchanged fire, both sides would trade words. Sigismund hailed the vengeful spirit, much to Abaddon's delight. The picked feed of the High Marshal suddenly illuminated the deck. Sitting atop his command throne, Sigismund rested a hand on the hilt of his black sword. Many traitors flinched at the sight, for every one of them had lost brothers to this weapon. Sigismund had wielded it with unparalleled skill during the Siege of Terror, slaughtering countless traitor champions, including Khan of the World Eaters. Though the High Marshal had noticeably aged, his eyes shone with the same passion. Sigismund had no interest in conversation. He would only deliver a promise to his former brothers. The High Marshal would not suffer the unclean to live. He would uphold the honor of the Emperor. He would abhor and destroy the witch. He would accept any challenge, no matter the odds. Ezekiel relished in the moment. No warp, treachery, or dark pacts would serve him in this situation. This would be a contest of arms against a foe he admired. For the first time in 7 centuries, heretic and loyalist space marines would slaughter each other among the stars. Thus began the first battle of Cadia. Both fleets clashed with a fury not seen since the Horus Heresy. 2 former first captains of the Legion's Astartes were facing one another. Both had shared their original colours and Legion names throughout the centuries, but neither had abandoned their will to see the other dead. Due to its 3-dimensional nature, Void War cannot be fought in a linear fashion. Both fleets adopted standard Imperial battle doctrines. The Principia Bellicosa of the pre-Heresy legions had long ago established the best way to engage in the Void. The Black Legion and the Black Templars thus split their fleets into smaller subgroups. Each was composed of larger ships of the line and their escorts. A battle group would vie for control over a spherical region several hundreds of kilometers around it and provide mutual support to one another. Much like any battle, however, it did not take much to muddle the waters. Soon enough, subfleets began overlapping one another's zones. Fire was traded furiously from all directions. Ships were being gutted one after the other, exposing their crews to the cold vacuum of space. Abaddon had no interest in commanding the battle from the deck of his ship. He ordered Iskander to remain aboard the flagship and made for the nearest boarding torpedo. The vengeful spirit launched through the enemy formation. A formidable vessel, it had been mutated by the warp into an even more lethal tool of war. Soon enough, the two flagships were within boarding range of each other. They flew past each other, emptying the fury of all their guns. Boarding pods were launched. Fighter escorts buzzed like flies out of launch bays, their pilots desperately trying to shoot down any missile that made for the pods. Once they were clear of each other, both ships made to turn, but the warp-enhanced Vengeful Spirit was faster. It opened fire once again, hitting the prow of the Black Templar flagship. The damage was severe, and the boarding pods struck home. Biting deep into the enemy hull, the boarding pods opened their doors. Chaos Astartes roared as they charged into the corridors of the Eternal Crusader. At their head stood Abaddon, hunting for the High Marshal. Black Templar counter-boarding teams met the Black Legion head-on. Bolters and chainblades sang within the sacred halls of the Gloriana vessel. Battles were won and lost from both sides within the labyrinthine corridors. After several bloody skirmishes, Abaddon finally slaughtered his way to Sigismund, accompanied by 30 of his men. The High Marshal was surrounded by 9 of his sword brethren. Dozens of Black Legion corpses lay around the place where they were making their stand. Abaddon lowered his blade. He begged Sigismund not to throw away his life for the sake of a master who had betrayed them all. The Imperium belonged to the Astartes, who had built it with their blood. It was theirs by right. Sigismund would hear none of it. Abaddon had lost the right to speak for the Imperium when he helped bring it to its knees. Sensing words were useless, Abaddon reached for his sword. Sigismund drew the black blade from its scabbard. Both warriors saluted each other. Thus, the fight began. The High Marshal's age quickly started to show. Once the greatest duelist of the Legions Astartes, he was now as slow as Abaddon in his Terminator armor. Yet for all his years, he was still a match for any warrior, including Ezekiel himself. Abaddon rained down fight-ending blows with both his sword and the Talon of Horus. Each strike was enhanced by the superior fiber bundles of his Terminator plate. Sigismund parried each hit, launching counterattacks with every move of his blade. Even though the outcome of the Void War was all but decided, this duel rested on a knife's edge. Not one sword brother or Black Legionnaire dared intervene. This was an encounter 7 centuries in the making. History was written with every scored hit, and no warrior, traitor or loyal would mar the moment. As the duel continued, Abaddon's victory drew nearer. The Black Templar fleet was slowly being routed, and the enemy leader had been brought to single combat. Even if Abaddon perished, his 30 men would cut down the High Marshal in a hail of bolter fire. The Chaos Gods, however, would not make things easy for their champion. While he and Sigismund fought on the deck of the Eternal Crusader, alarms flared on the bridge of the Vengeful Spirit. A third massive fleet was materializing out of the warp, right behind the lines of the Black Legion. Aboard the traitor flagship, Iskander Khaon needed no Auspex scans to tell him who they were. Darovek had finally come. It is on this cliffhanger that we will conclude today's video. If you want to see how the Black Crusade continues, make sure you have subscribed and pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord and much more. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we will catch you on the next one. Catch you